A struggling waitress was fired for bringing her sick daughter to work. Didn't know her new boss walked in and changed everything. You left the floor for 30 minutes. 30 minutes? The manager's voice cut through the low hum of the morning rush like a blade. To go play with your kid in the storage room? What the hell do you think this is, Pamela? A daycare? Pamela froze in place near the kitchen door, her apron slightly stained, her notepad clutched tight in one hand. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a bun, wisps falling around her flushed cheeks. She looked up slowly, eyes wide with panic. "No," she said softly. I'm sorry. She has a fever. I didn't know what else to do." The customers near the front paused, forks halfway to mouths. Some pretended not to hear. A few glanced curiously, then looked away. The manager, a wiry man named Carl with a short fuse and a long list of grudges, leaned in closer, voice rising even more. "You brought a sick toddler into a food service environment? Are you out of your mind?" Pamela's voice cracked. "If I took her to the hospital, they'd admit her for days, and if I miss even 2 shifts, I won't make rent next month. I just needed to make it through today. She's in the back, quiet, sleeping. I checked on her during the break." "Break?" Carl barked. "You're a server. You take breaks when I say you take breaks. You left 3 tables, waiting for coffee." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes welling. "Please." "I'll make it up. I'll stay late. I'll cover extra shifts." Carl pointed to the door. "No, we're done. This is not the first time you've let your personal drama bleed into work. Pack your things. You're fired!" Pamela's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked over her shoulder toward the back room, where her daughter lay bundled in a blanket atop 2 flattened boxes and a jacket. Her heart pounded in her chest. I'll get her," she whispered. Carl shook his head and walked off, muttering, "Unbelievable." She walked stiffly past the fry station, past curious eyes and silent stares, into the dimly lit storage room where her little girl Maria lay sleeping. Her cheeks were flushed from fever, her curls damp with sweat. Pamela crouched down, gently touched her forehead, then carefully wrapped the child in the blanket. Maria stirred and blinked slowly. "Mommy?" she murmured. "It's okay, baby." "I've got you," Pamela whispered, swallowing the lump in her throat. She lifted her daughter into her arms, the small body burning against her chest. As she stepped out the back door of the restaurant, the cold drizzle of morning rain turned heavier. Within seconds, her thin shirt was soaked. She clutched Maria tighter, shielding the child with her own body as best she could. Her eyes stung from the wet and the shame. She didn't look back. Not at the kitchen. Not at Carl. Not at the people who didn't speak up. She walked forward, out into the gray street, a 3-year-old in her arms and nowhere to go. The rain fell harder now, soaking through her thin clothes, but she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, driven only by instinct and desperation. What Pamela didn't see, what she couldn't have known, was the man sitting alone in the far corner booth by the window. He had been there the entire time. He had seen everything. He watched as the front door swung closed behind her, watched the child's tiny face pressed against her mother's shoulder, and the way Pamela's hand never once loosened its grip. He didn't speak, he didn't move, but something in his expression shifted, just slightly, as if a memory had stirred from long ago. He reached for his coffee but did not drink it. Instead, he sat very still, eyes fixed on the rain-drenched sidewalk where a young mother and her sick child disappeared into the morning. The diner was quieter now. The breakfast rush had passed, leaving behind empty plates and half-drunk coffee cups. But at the corner booth near the window, one man had barely touched his meal. Gerald Whitmore sat with perfect posture, eyes on the rain-smeared glass, though his thoughts were miles from the storm outside. Dressed in a plain dark coat and gray button-down shirt, he looked no different from any other businessman grabbing breakfast on his way to somewhere important, which was exactly what he wanted. What no one knew, not the servers, not the cook, not the red-faced manager in the back room, was that Gerald was not just another customer. He was the new owner. The ink had dried only 3 weeks ago. His company, Whitmore Hospitality Group, had acquired the struggling diner chain in a quiet buyout. Now he was spending a month visiting locations, anonymously, observing their culture, their management, their values, or lack thereof. Today, this small suburban location had given him more than enough to think about. He picked up his coffee and took a slow sip, still staring through the window at the sidewalk where Pamela had vanished minutes earlier. He could still hear the way the manager had yelled at her, the cruelty in his voice, the way the room had fallen silent, yet no one had spoken up. The image of the young woman holding her feverish daughter would not leave his mind. Her eyes had said everything. Shame, fear, exhaustion. But also something else, something that hit Gerald harder than he expected. Restraint. Dignity. She had begged with her voice low, her posture still. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't cursed. She had simply endured. He remembered that look, because he had once worn it. He opened the leather notebook he carried everywhere and flipped to a clean page. In tidy, precise handwriting he wrote, Pamela, waitress, blonde, early 20s, fired for caring for her child. Calm under pressure, should not be discarded. He drew a line under her name, then turned to a different section, labeled Internal Review, Personnel. Manager, Carl, aggressive, lacks empathy, endangers brand integrity. Gerald closed the notebook and tapped the pen once against the edge of the table. It was time to go. He waved over the young server who had nervously brought him his untouched breakfast earlier. Can I get the check? He asked politely. She nodded, already fumbling with the bill folder. Yes, sir. I hope everything was okay. I'm really sorry about the earlier situation. Gerald offered a smile, one that did not quite reach his eyes. It was informative, he said. He took the folder, slipped in a crisp $100 bill, and added a smaller card behind it. On the back of the card, in firm black ink, he wrote a single note. Management like this hurts more than your margins. I'll be back. He stood, adjusted his coat, and walked out into the drizzle without another word. As the door closed behind him, the young server opened the folder, her eyes widening at the tip and the message. She turned the card over. Her breath caught. Whitmore Hospitality Group, CEO. She looked up toward the door, but Gerald was already gone. Pamela sat in the corner of the tiny apartment, holding Maria close. The landlord's voice still echoed in her ears, flat, impatient, final. You're a week late again. I'm sorry, Pam, but I have bills too. You need to be out by tomorrow. She didn't argue. She couldn't. There was no money left to argue with. She packed what she could into 2 bags, bundled Maria in an oversized hoodie, and stepped out into the gray afternoon, with nowhere to go. By dusk, the drizzle had returned, soaking their shoes as they trudged through back streets and alleyways, looking for anywhere dry. Pamela's final hope was the county hospital. She sat with Maria on her lap for hours in the emergency room lobby, cradling the toddler's warm body. When their turn finally came, the nurse glanced at the outdated insurance card and gave a tired, apologetic shake of the head. She needs rest and fluids, but we can't admit her without coverage, the nurse said gently. Do you have a place to stay? Pamela stared at the floor. Outside, the rain came harder. They wandered aimlessly for a while until the buildings thinned and the sidewalk gave way to parked cars and closed storefronts. Pamela found a narrow alley behind a laundromat, hidden from view but just wide enough for them to sit under a crooked awning. She laid down the thin blanket she'd carried in her bag, sat with her back to the brick wall, and pulled Maria into her lap. Her daughter whimpered in her sleep. Pamela's hands trembled as she wrapped the blanket around them both. Rain pounded the pavement just inches away. Her throat tightened, her eyes burned, and she could no longer hold it in. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely audible over the storm. I've done everything I could. I really tried, baby. Maria stirred, opened her eyes slowly, and in a soft, sleepy voice said, It's okay, Mommy. I don't need anything, just you. Pamela's heart shattered. She buried her face in her daughter's damp hair, crying silently, her shoulders shaking with the weight of every failure she had carried for years. Then came the headlights. A sleek black car pulled to the curb just outside the alley. Pamela flinched, clutching Maria protectively, unsure if they were about to be told to move again. The driver's side window rolled down, and there he was, the man from the diner, Gerald. He looked directly at her, not with pity, but with quiet recognition. "You need a place to get warm," he said. His voice was calm, even. "Please, get in." Pamela hesitated. Her instincts screamed to be cautious, but her arms were going numb, and Maria's fever had returned. She looked at Gerald one more time. There was something steady in his eyes, no agenda, no judgment. She nodded. Inside the car, warmth enveloped them immediately. Pamela sank into the seat, still holding Maria tightly. Gerald didn't speak right away. He simply turned the heat on high and handed her a clean towel from the back seat. "Thank you," she murmured. They drove in silence for several minutes. Finally, Gerald said, "I remember you, from the diner." Pamela stiffened. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he shook his head. "I'm not." She looked at him, surprised. He continued, "I saw a woman doing everything she could to protect her child. That's not something to be ashamed of." Pamela exhaled slowly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I used to be in school, college actually, business major. I had plans, internships, even a scholarship. But then, I met someone. Thought he cared. Got pregnant. He left. My parents cut me off, said I ruined everything." She stared out the window. "I chose my daughter. I chose to keep her. And after that, nothing was the same. I've done everything from cleaning offices to selling cupcakes on sidewalks. But it's never enough." Gerald was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. "I was raised in a state facility. Bounced from group home to group home. No one wanted a boy who kept to himself and didn't know how to smile. I learned early how easy it is to be forgotten." Pamela turned to look at him. He met her gaze and said quietly, "I know what it feels like to be invisible." Gerald pulled the car into a parking lot under a covered awning and turned off the engine. The rain tapped gently on the roof. "I've built everything I have by watching people like you," he said. "People who refuse to give up, who endure quietly." He looked down at Maria, now asleep in her mother's arms, then back to Pamela. "I see myself in you," he said, his voice softer now. "But you're stronger. You've cared for someone else when no one cared for you." Pamela blinked, eyes full. "I don't know what to say." Gerald offered the faintest smile. "You don't have to say anything. Just let me help." Pamela sat in a quiet, modern lounge on the top floor of an office building she never imagined stepping foot inside. Her clothes, still damp from the night before, had been exchanged for a simple outfit someone from the staff had quietly brought her. Maria, finally resting comfortably, was in a nearby room, wrapped in a blanket and watching cartoons on a tablet. She held a paper cup of tea, hands wrapped tightly around it, more for comfort than warmth. Across from her sat Gerald, still dressed neatly, his expression unreadable but not cold. He placed a folder on the table between them. "I want to offer you a position," he said, his voice even and direct. Pamela blinked. I'm sorry, what?" "At our flagship restaurant. It's opening in 3 weeks downtown. We're finalizing the team now," Gerald explained. "It's a position for assistant floor manager." She stared at him. "I don't understand." Gerald pushed the folder slightly closer. "You've been on your feet since you were 19. You've led without being given a title, solved problems without training, handled pressure. No job description could prepare you for. That's more than half the candidates I've interviewed." Pamela shook her head, overwhelmed. "But I didn't finish college. I haven't worked anywhere fancy, and yesterday I was fired in front of a room full of strangers." He nodded. "I saw what happened, and what I saw wasn't someone who got fired. I saw someone trying to hold it all together, who didn't fold under pressure, who stayed composed even when humiliated. You chose to protect your daughter. That's leadership." She looked down at her tea, emotions rising again. "I've made a lot of mistakes," she said quietly. "So have I," Gerald replied. "But mistakes aren't the measure of someone's worth. What they do next is." He opened the folder for her. Inside was a formal job offer, salary, schedule, benefits, full training provided. It was typed neatly, professional, and real. "You'd start as a manager in training," he continued. "We'll mentor you, get you certified. But this position isn't a test. It's trust." Pamela couldn't speak. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. She reached out, fingertips brushing the top of the page. "This is," she whispered. "It's more than a job." Gerald leaned back slightly, folding his hands in front of him. "I'm not giving you this because I feel bad. I'm offering it because I believe in potential. And I believe in you." Pamela stared at the contract for a long moment, her hand shaking as she finally lifted the pen he had placed beside it. "I don't think anyone's ever believed in me like this before," she said, voice breaking. Gerald's tone softened. "Well, now someone does." She pressed the pen to the paper, her name forming in slow, careful strokes. It wasn't just a signature, it was the start of a new chapter, one she had almost given up hoping for. And when she looked up at Gerald, she saw not a CEO, not a savior, but someone who understood what it meant to have everything and still feel alone. Until someone reaches out and says, "You belong here." The transformation was quiet, but powerful. In just a few weeks, Pamela had gone from a woman clinging to survival to a rising presence inside one of the city's most anticipated restaurant launches. She absorbed everything. She shadowed floor managers, memorized seating maps, learned the reservation system in days, and could quote back health codes by heart. She remembered every staff member's name, their schedules, their birthdays. When a shipment arrived late or a vendor got the order wrong, she didn't panic. She solved the problem before anyone above her had to ask. Word spread quickly. "She's not just smart," the executive chef said during one staff meeting. "She listens and she leads." And she did. Her tone was never harsh, her instructions always clear. Staff followed her not because of her title, but because she moved with purpose and treated everyone with respect. Gerald watched it all from the background. He never hovered, he never interfered, but he saw how Pamela stayed late to help new hires, how she returned every extra uniform that came in slightly stained because someone else might need it more. He also saw the moments no one else did, how her eyes drifted to her phone every afternoon at 3:30, checking for the daycare pickup message. How she once missed a team dinner because Maria had a cold. How she always packed 2 snacks in her purse, just in case. So Gerald made quiet arrangements. He ensured Maria had a full scholarship to one of the best nearby Montessori programs. He personally approved a flexible work schedule, hidden beneath internal operations needs in HR paperwork. No one knew, and Pamela never asked. She simply showed up, did the work, and earned everything. One rainy Tuesday, after a long morning of inventory checks and supplier calls, Pamela returned to her desk, a small corner tucked between the staff lounge and the manager's office. There, sitting neatly on her desk, was a small takeout box. She blinked. Inside was a container of mini buttered noodles, 2 cut strawberries, and a small note. Exactly what Maria loved. Pamela opened the note with cautious fingers. To the mother of a little angel, don't forget to eat today. Her heart clenched, her throat tightened. She didn't need a signature to know who had left it. She sat for a long moment, the box in front of her, her fingers pressed to her lips. Gerald never made a show of anything. He didn't stand in hallways waiting for thank yous. But he saw her, not as a project, not as a case to solve, as a person, someone who had fought her way back from nothing, someone who mattered. Pamela pulled out her phone and snapped a photo, not to post, not to share, just to remember. Then she quietly opened the box and took the first bite. And for the first time in years, she ate without rushing, without guilt, and without fear of what came next. By the time the flagship restaurant celebrated its first full quarter of operation, Pamela's name had become more than just familiar, it had become respected. She no longer operated from the quiet corners of the staff lounge or behind the reservation counter. She now stood in strategy meetings, presenting shift rotation models and cost-cutting proposals to senior leadership. She had developed a new scheduling system that not only reduced overtime pay, but also improved employee morale, two things rarely achieved together. Every proposal she submitted carried her signature at the bottom. Everyone was approved, often quietly, without fanfare, but always swiftly by Gerald. He never praised her in public, never pulled her aside to offer applause, but he kept every signed copy of her proposals in a personal file labeled Internal Growth. It was his private collection of victories. And then came the invitation. Pamela was asked to be a keynote speaker at a national culinary industry conference. The theme was Leadership Without a Title, and someone had nominated her anonymously. She said yes. The night before the conference, she sat at her kitchen table with Maria, who was now healthy and thriving in preschool. The little girl drew pictures on a napkin while Pamela practiced her speech under her breath. Maria looked up and said, "Are you going to talk about being brave, Mommy?" Pamela paused, then smiled. "I think I am." The next morning, in a packed ballroom filled with restaurateurs, chefs, investors, and students, Pamela stepped onto the stage in a simple navy blue dress and heels that still felt foreign. The spotlight was bright. The silence before she spoke felt deafening. She took a breath. "I was fired for bringing my daughter to work," she began. A murmur of surprise rolled through the audience. "I didn't do it to be careless. I did it because she was sick. I couldn't afford to miss a shift and I had no one else. I was told I was unprofessional, that I was a distraction, that I didn't belong." She paused. But someone saw something different. Someone offered me a chance, not because they felt sorry for me, but because they believed I had more to offer. She told her story, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She spoke about the struggle of single motherhood, of second chances, of working twice as hard to be seen half as much, and how, now, she was leading a team in one of the fastest-growing restaurant groups in the country. When she stepped down from the stage, the room rose to their feet. The video was shared online. Within days, she was in trade publications, on food industry podcasts, and invited to speak at universities. Headlines read, "From fired waitress to F&B rising star, Pamela Wren, the face of second chances." But while Pamela was stepping into the spotlight, Gerald found himself doing something he'd avoided for years, speaking publicly. For nearly a decade, he had declined every interview request, avoided the press, and let the company's brand speak for itself. But after Pamela's story went viral, the calls became persistent. Finally, he said yes. In a rare media appearance at a leadership forum, he sat on stage beside other CEOs, fielding questions about expansion, innovation, and internal culture. Then came the inevitable. "Mr. Whitmore, you've been praised recently for hiring someone who was publicly fired for bringing her child to work. Why did you take that risk?" Gerald didn't flinch. "I didn't hire a mother," he said. "I hired a leader." The room went still. He continued, "I hired someone who showed resilience under pressure, who refused to let circumstance define her, and who now leads with empathy because she knows what it's like to be invisible. What makes me proud isn't her title. It's the fact that her daughter will grow up knowing her mother didn't just survive. She rose." Pamela sat in the front row of the audience that day, wearing a gray blazer and soft eyes full of emotion. She had heard many things in her life: accusations, assumptions, dismissals. But this was the first time she had heard her truth spoken aloud by someone who had once been silent. Her hands trembled in her lap. She blinked fast. But the tears came anyway, not from pain, from pride. The invitation had come in a simple email. If your schedule allows, I'd like you and Maria to accompany me on a site visit to Seabrook. It's a short trip, but I think you'll both enjoy it." Pamela read it twice, then again. It would be her first time leaving the state in over 5 years, and her first time on a plane with her daughter. She packed carefully, nervously. Maria, on the other hand, was thrilled. "Are we flying in the sky like birds?" she squealed, arms outstretched. "Yes, baby," Pamela said with a soft smile. "Like birds." Seabrook was a quiet, windswept coastal town, its boardwalk dotted with mom-and-pop shops and empty summer rentals. Gerald was scouting the location for a boutique dining concept he had envisioned, something small, local, elegant. After the meetings and property walkthroughs, he suggested an evening walk. The three of them ended up climbing a low dune that overlooked the ocean. Maria dashed ahead, running through the sand, her laughter echoing like wind chimes. Pamela and Gerald followed more slowly, eventually sitting side by side on a patch of dry grass that looked out over the water. It was the most peaceful silence Pamela had experienced in years. Gerald spoke first. "I used to come here," he said quietly, "back when I lived in the group home upstate. Every summer they took us here for one weekend. We never went in the water, though, just walked along the beach." Pamela turned to him, surprised. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the horizon. "I used to collect shells," he continued, "pretended they were jewelry. I'd set them out on a towel and tell the others they were for sale. I guess I hoped someone, some nice couple walking by, would see me and decide they wanted a kid like me." Pamela didn't speak. She simply reached down, picked up a smooth white shell, and placed it gently in his hand. Gerald looked at the shell, then at her, and for once didn't hide. They sat that way for a while, just listening to the waves. Back at the hotel that night, Maria was unusually quiet. She sat at the little desk in their suite, threading something through a string with serious focus. Gerald passed by on his way to set down some files, then paused. On the table in front of Maria was a handmade necklace, roughly looped, slightly uneven. Strung along the cord were tiny seashells. Gerald knelt down beside her. "Is that for your mom?" he asked gently. Maria shook her head. "No, it's for you," he blinked. "For me?" She nodded, handing it to him proudly. "Mama says when someone shares a real memory, it means they're important, so I wanted you to have something special too." Gerald took the necklace in his hands. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and it was beautiful. He didn't say much, just smiled softly and placed it around his neck. He wore it the rest of the night, even during their dinner downstairs. When the maitre d' looked curiously at the shells, Gerald simply said, "Limited edition, very rare." That night, Pamela watched him from across the table as he leaned in to listen to one of Maria's endless stories. He looked lighter somehow, not younger, not different, just more whole. And for the first time, Pamela didn't feel like she was rebuilding her life. She felt like she was building something new with someone who wasn't afraid to share the past. Months passed, and what had once felt impossible now lived in the rhythm of Pamela's every day. Under her leadership, the restaurant chain began to flourish in ways no one had predicted. Staff turnover dropped. Customer satisfaction soared. She introduced a mentorship program for hourly workers who wanted to grow, created flexible scheduling models for single parents, and developed an onboarding process that actually felt human. It didn't take long for the executive board to notice. And neither did Gerald. At the next quarterly meeting, he proposed the creation of a brand new role, one that had never existed in the company's long, numbers-driven history. Director of People and Development. He said the title slowly, then added, "And there's only one person I trust to build it." The vote was unanimous. Pamela accepted the offer in quiet disbelief, her voice trembling slightly as she shook hands with the board. And then, life continued. But it was different now. Not louder, not flashier, just fuller. Pamela still showed up early. She still packed 2 snacks in her bag for Maria, still took the train when she didn't have to. but her steps were no longer driven by fear or urgency. They carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew she belonged. Gerald, too, seemed changed. He still wore tailored suits and made bold decisions, but he smiled more, stayed longer in staff meetings, and though he never said it aloud, people around him began to sense what had shifted. He hadn't just built a company, he had found something to come home to. And yet, there was no big announcement, no ring, no press release. Gerald didn't throw parties. He did something subtler. When the team launched a new seasonal menu across all flagship locations, Pamela was asked to sign off on the final design before print. The layout was sleek, elegant. The background image, barely visible behind the wine list, was a faded, dreamy photo. She blinked, her heart caught. It was the three of them. A photo from that evening in Seabrook, Maria between them, holding both their hands, facing the ocean. The horizon blurred by sunlight. It wasn't labeled. No one else would notice, but she knew. Later that evening, Pamela stood beside Gerald in the company's design studio. The proof pages spread across the table. She turned to him and smiled softly. "You didn't have to do this." He looked at the photo, then at her. "I wanted to," he said, then paused. "I've spent my whole life building something I thought would matter." Pamela waited, her hand gently brushing the edge of the page. "And it does," he added. "But thanks to you, I know what matters more." She didn't ask what. He didn't say, "I love you." He simply said, "You've given me somewhere to return to, somewhere real." At the flagship restaurant's grand reopening, a soft jazz band played as guests mingled beneath strings of warm lights. Donors, press, industry icons, all gathered to toast a success no one had seen coming. When the time came for opening remarks, Pamela was invited to the stage. She didn't walk alone. Maria joined her, in a soft pink dress and shiny shoes, proudly holding her mother's hand. Pamela stepped up to the microphone, took a breath, and began. 3 years ago, I was fired in front of a room full of strangers for trying to protect my child. That night I thought the world had shut its doors on me. She glanced at Gerald, who stood in the back of the room, arms crossed, eyes warm. "But some doors," she continued, "only open when you find yourself in places no one expects. Like the backseat of a stranger's car, in the middle of a rainstorm." Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. "But that stranger didn't stay a stranger," she said. "And what I found wasn't just a job or a second chance. I found dignity and belonging, and the courage to believe that my story didn't end in failure." She looked down at Maria, then back at the audience. "I stand here not because I did everything right. I stand here because someone believed I could still rise." The applause came slowly at first, then built until it filled the entire space. Gerald stayed where he was, watching the two of them on stage, the quiet pride in his chest louder than anything he could have said aloud. And when the lights dimmed and the speeches ended, the three of them stood together at the edge of the room, not defined by labels, not defined by roles, but by choice, by love that didn't need to be declared to be understood. No one said the word family, but everyone in that room felt it. Some stories do not end with grand declarations, but with quiet choices, the ones made every day, in rainstorms and boardrooms, in back seats and kitchens. Pamela didn't set out to change a company or a man's life. She just refused to give up. And sometimes, that's all it takes, to open a door that leads to everything. If this story moved you, if you felt even a flicker of hope, strength, or warmth, please subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. Here, we honor the resilience of the human heart and celebrate the ordinary moments that lead to extraordinary love. Until next time, take care and never stop believing in second chances.